John, and Sean.
That's it.
Yeah, I saw the prompt at the top.
Yeah.
I think the statement is, "Why is God hiding?" I guess
Yeah.
I just want to talk about that one, I guess.
Sure.
That seems interesting to me.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we're given to believe that God wants to have a relationship with us. And further, we're given to believe that if we fail to have that relationship, that we pay some kind of penalty, that there's some sort of salvation which is available exclusively to people who participate in this relationship. And yet he's so coy. He makes himself so difficult to discern. And some people claim that it's obvious that he's there, either because they appeal to their own personal experience, or they'll appeal to scripture and quote Romans 1 or something and say, look at the trees, and that as if that's counts as evidence for a deity. But from my
Hmm.
perspective, if he was trying as hard as possible to remain completely undetectable, it would look exactly like this.
That's interesting. So I guess when you say like, um, what we see in the world is what we would expect if God was trying to hide. Like that's your position?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, the world looks like a world with a god trying really hard not to be detected.
Oh, okay. So what do you make of the 5 billion plus believers in God in the world currently?
what that means is the most of the world either doesn't believe in a god or believes in the wrong god or believes in multiples of the wrong god. So the correct god to those people is imperceptible. Most of us have tried to ascertain the truth. We've all come to our own conclusions, but your God, the one you believe exists, is imperceptible to me as much as I have tried. If God is all powerful, that means he is by definition hiding because I am unable to perceive him no matter how hard I have tried. So why doesn't he make himself known to me and all the rest of the world who believes in the wrong gods? Hey, I am the one true God. Here are the rules. This is the correct religion, etc. And then everyone can
Uh-huh.
make use their free will to make a choice to follow him or not.
Yeah, so I guess just I'm questioning the assumption. Why is the onus on God and not the people that don't believe in him? Why
So
should I
what
think
what
that?
did I so
I understand you said omnipotence, but why would I assume, like, for example, a Hindu, the onus isn't on the Hindu and not on, like,
well
God,
because
right?
well
Or on
because
God.
because people become convinced of the if you're born and raised in India into a Hindu family, you're going to believe in all the wrong gods. How is the onus on them? So like let's say I found out.
Well, I'm asking you. I don't know why you asked me a question. I'm asking you, why should I think the onus is on God and not on the Hindu?
Because
Because
he's the one who's suggesting that people will be punished for coming to the wrong conclusions. And if
Uh-huh.
that's true, then it's on him morally to make sure that that doesn't happen.
I don't see how that follows.
Well,
Like,
imagine
if because it could
imagine
just be the case, right, that the Hindu came to the wrong conclusion. So why is that God's fault? Help
well,
me out here.
because it's not his fault that they came to the wrong conclusion. It's his fault for not providing them with enough evidence to come to the right conclusion. And it's morally important because he's the one saying he's going to chuck him in a lake of fire for making the
Hmm.
wrong, the coming to the. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, people have different views about exactly what happens afterwards, and what the penalties for getting the answer wrong is. But this is like setting up a school quiz. Imagine if a teacher set up a school quiz and then said to the students, if you don't get past the grade on this school quiz, you're going to get set on fire, but then didn't give the students enough information to come to the right answers in the quiz. We would call that a bad teacher. We would call that morally unacceptable. Don't you think?
Okay. So where are we getting the idea that he hasn't given, like, say, the Hindu enough evidence? Where's
Well,
that coming
let's
from?
let's not
because the
use a
Hindu
Hindu. Let's use me,
Hmm.
right? Does God know what it would take to make me absolutely certain that he's there?
Yeah,
Has he provided that?
I have no idea.
Well, the answer has to be no, because
No,
I'm.
not necessarily.
No, it definitionally does, because if he had provided it, I'd be a theist.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I guess that makes
right?
sense.
So he has not provided that. Now, it might be that he's got a really cool reason for not having provided it, but it's still the case that he hasn't provided it.
Uh-huh.
So if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I could potentially be punished for not having the right beliefs. But that doesn't seem fair, because God
Mhm.
could have equipped me with the information that I need to have the right beliefs and just hasn't done it.
So I guess why do we think that God should equip you with that? That's what I'm
Because
not seeing.
because he's
It's-
because he's threatening to punish me for not having them, depending on what your view is on eschatology and what happens after you die and what the
Yeah.
consequences are. But if I need to get right with Jesus in order to avoid
Mhm.
hell, which is morally idiotic, but if we just for the sake of argument assume that that's the case, if that's the rule he's put in place, if that's the scheme he's devised, and we're all now participating in this game that none of us asked to participate in, nobody signed up for this scheme, nobody said yes, let me be involved in the get burned if you have the wrong beliefs game. We're all just entered into it at the moment of our creation or conception. So we're now being signed up for this. Of course, it's incumbent on him to make sure that people don't get unduly punished because he didn't provide the right evidence.
Okay. Do you have an intellect and a will?
I believe so.
Do you use it?
I try to.
yes, you
Okay.
do
So
as
is
well.
is the point that God should just give it to you and you don't have to do anything? Is that your view? Because you
He either
understand you're
wants
talking about
he
Christianity.
yeah
Like if you're going to talk about Christianity, you understand that as Christians, we believe that people have a will,
yeah
and we believe in this thing called like free will.
yeah. But
Do you
So people
believe?
free
have
will's got nothing to
people.
do with perception.
Well, we don't take disbelief to be merely intellectual.
Well,
Disbelief has to do with the will.
that's why I wrote a book about
Hmm.
this, which shows that disbelief is not a matter of will. You can't believe something if you're not convinced it's true. Very easy to say we don't take disbelief to be merely intellectual. What that does is it provides the grounding for criminalizing not being convinced of something, and that is bullshit, basically,
Well,
because
yeah, and
you can't believe something if you're not convinced it's true.
it would be an injustice on the part of the human to not render God what he's due, which is worship. So that would be a criminalized, like a criminal offense. But like, I don't know why we're getting into that. Like Christians take the view that some people are just reprobated in the sense that like God leaves them to their blindness because of their sins. He punishes them.
It's an idiotic view. God could
How's
God
that
It-
any? How's
could
that
equip
idiotic?
us all with certain knowledge that He's
Yeah,
there.
he could.
Then we could use our free will to decide whether
Hmm.
we want to grovel enough to Him to please Him. That would be a matter for our free will. But He just doesn't do that. Instead, we
Yeah, but
get
just.
we get
Hmm.
verses like Romans saying, "But the evidence is all around you. Look at it. Look at the trees." That's not convincing.
Yeah, but also some people are like their blindness is a punishment for their sins. That's a
That,
Christian view.
that makes
So
it
this
even
is
worse.
absolutely that's
That makes it even
consistent with
worse.
the
Then
thesis that
he's
God is hidden.
denying people the ability to discern him and to see that he's
Yeah, he's
there.
punishing them. That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Isn't
Why
it
why would
interesting?
that be
Hold,
problematic?
hold, hold on, but isn't it interesting that those who are worthy for him to grant them their knowledge so happens to coincide largely on which geography somebody is born into and which family they're born into. If they're born in Saudi Arabia or Thailand or India, they are far less likely to be worthy of God
Hmm.
showing himself than somebody born into a Christian home.
Yeah, or he could reveal himself to all these people, yet they still don't believe, irregardless
That's
of where
that's a
they're
contradiction.
born. What's the
That's a
contradiction?
contradiction. If
What's the
God showed
contradiction?
him, because if God showed himself, they would believe in the right God. If God tried to show himself and failed, then he's not all
Okay,
powerful.
so what do we make of like Judas? What's his excuse? God showed himself, he followed God, and he still,
Well, Judas
failed at
Judas
the
was
end,
a
right?
believer. So once you believe, you can make a decision whether you're going to follow that God or not,
yeah.
right?
There's
Yeah,
always this
but
conflation of knowing God's there and then worshipping Him or following Him. One does not immediately convert to the other. You can meet God and say hi God and then not follow Him. I mean, that's presumably what Satan did. Satan wasn't in any doubt about God's existence. He just didn't want to roll with Him.
all right, cool. So let me just get clear on two things. So the first thing would be, so when it says why is God hiding, that's not just like God's existence, that's specifically X, Y, like X religion or whatever, right? Like
You
it's
could
also
argue both, but we could start with just God's existence. That he exists and who he is, who
hmm
the right God is. He could
well, because
he could easily make it so everyone on the planet knows who he is, and there'll be some Judases, some people that don't want to follow him, but at least it's an act of free will at that point. What we believe to be true is not an act of free will. So
okay.
basically, yeah, so belief isn't a choice. So that's the main problem here. If he
Oh,
lets everyone know he exists, then we have the choice to follow him or not follow him, etc.
so is that in your like background assumptions? Belief is not a choice? Well, if by belief you just mean like affirming some proposition, then you can
No.
affirm
Well, no,
that.
not no, not
Belief is not
affirming.
affirming propositions. Belief is the internal sense that something is true or likely true. The internal state of being convinced that something is true or likely true. And you know that you can't. You can say you can because you're getting confused between believing something and saying words. Anyone can say words. But if I say to you, believe that you never had a childhood, and you say you can do it, I would call you a liar. You can't. You can't do that. And we
Wait,
cannot
why can't I
summon
do that?
because
Well, try it.
because you can only believe something
Well, even if
if
I
you're
couldn't
convinced
do
it's
it,
true.
right? Like even if I couldn't do it, doesn't mean it's not possible, right?
It does. You can't believe
No,
something
it
if you're
doesn't
not
follow.
if it does. You can't
If
believe
you can't do
something
it,
if
it's
you,
impossible for you to do it. It's a tautology.
No, I'm
yeah,
saying like impossible for anyone to do it.
No,
it
no,
is.
no.
Somebody,
It's impossible for
So
anyone to believe something that they're not
okay,
convinced is
that
true.
I want that argument.
Okay, so here's how it works. Belief is what happens to you when your mind becomes convinced that something is true. If your mind is not convinced that something is true, belief is not happening. And if your mind is convinced that something is true, you can't stop the belief. It happens without permission, it just happens to you. The question then just becomes, and that should be uncontroversial, because we can define belief as the condition of being convinced that something is true or likely true. The question then becomes, can you just decide to find something convincing? And if you just think about it for a moment, you will see that you can't. You can try. You can try and talk yourself into something. You can decide what kind of information diet you have. You can drop yourself into cultures. You can affiliate with people. You can consume media or books or ideas. And all of those things may lead to a change in what you find convincing. But if that change doesn't happen, you're not believing. Thank you for the doggy on TikTok. That's very cute. Thank you very, very much indeed. Appreciate that. Gifting was suspended, but apparently it's back. But now it might be suspended again. TikTok is so sensitive. If you have a conversation on TikTok about anything other than like dancing or dogs or diets, it gets its knickers in a twist. Anyway, if you're not persuaded by something, do you grant that if you remain unpersuaded by something, that as long as that's true, belief can't happen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so then the question is, can you just decide to find something persuasive?
I
Not to
think
say it,
somebody can
not
do
to
it.
say,
Yeah.
not to say it,
I don't
to
see
find
why
it.
it would be impossible because I don't see a contradiction.
So the contradiction is that if you don't find it persuasive, if you're not convinced by it, and you are genuinely remain unconvinced by it, belief can't happen.
I'm just asking, is it impossible for someone to just find something convincing like on the spot?
Yes, if they don't find it convincing. Let's
Wait,
say
then that seems like a counterexample if it's possible, right?
both your parents are dolphins. Okay, both your parents are actually dolphins.
Yeah,
Now,
someone could find that convincing.
yeah, they can.
someone,
If they
but can
find it
you make the
convincing,
decision?
then they will believe it and they'll have no choice. What Sean asked you was, can you just decide now to start finding it convincing? And a second of introspection will show you that you can't. The reason
Wait,
you can't in this case is because you have lots and lots of evidence against that claim, right? So your mind is not able to process that idea and reach a point of conviction because you know your parents aren't dolphins. You remember them being people. Maybe you spoke to one of them last week and they weren't flipping around in the water, making funny clicking noises and eating small fish. You know your parents aren't dolphins. And so because you have that knowledge, you're not capable of becoming persuaded of the idea. Now, if something legitimately persuaded you of it, if you had some kind of mental mishap and you suddenly thought that your parents were dolphins, then in that moment, you would have no ability to not believe it. You would believe it, and it wouldn't be a matter of will. It would be because something had persuaded you, not because you just decided to. The claim is not
Oh,
that people's beliefs don't change, and the claim is not that no one can be persuaded of anything. The claim is that a change in belief always follows a change in what persuades you. And you
Well, yeah, it doesn't seem controversial. All right.
right,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I'm fine with that for
it
this
isn't controversial. But the
discussion.
reason why it's important is when we then bring it back to something like belief in a religious idea, you could say, well, that's categorically different because the dolphins, you've got lots of proof that your parents aren't dolphins, but there's no proof that Jesus didn't die for your sins or whatever. But here's the thing, is that introducing a degree of uncertainty into the equation doesn't suddenly magically equip you with a belief switch that you can switch on and off. The cognitive machinery in your brain that determines whether you find something convincing or not doesn't care about the reasons why you don't find it convincing. It just knows that you either do or you don't. And that's why you find yourself convinced of something or you don't find yourself convinced of something, and there's nothing you can do about it until something convinces you.
I don't think that's like super controversial though.
It's really not. It's pretty well established. The idea is called Doxastic involuntarism, and I've been thinking about this deeply, writing about it and researching it for some years, and I've yet to hear a single compelling argument against it. And I've read and listened to the best people who try. The arguments all fail.
And what that ties into, though, when it comes to the Abrahamic God, is that being saved, the divine pardon, is contingent, an absolute prerequisite. Granted, it's not the only requirement. You believe baptism is part of it, or what have you, but it starts with something we cannot choose. Neither John nor I can just flip a switch and decide to believe. I'm a former believer myself, and I began having doubts, and I fought against them, and I prayed, and I wanted to continue believing, but I couldn't. So what you have is a theology that casts moral aspersions on someone just for being unable to be convinced of a thing, when God could just be like, what I prayed, hey, whatever method, he's all powerful, he could do it however he wants. Just here I am. I actually exist. Okay, cool. I would still be a Christian to this day if that happened.
Yeah, I just have to while we're talking about this, I have to read this super chat from Gordon Love Science, who is one of our inner circle members. Thank you, Gordon. Lovely to see you in, and thank you so much for this. Gordon says the premise of belief being contingent upon persuasion is such a simple concept. I'm a new listener, but have yet to hear a single caller mount any kind of persuasive counter argument. There really aren't any counter arguments, and let me give you a slightly meta take on this. Which is, if you are not convinced by what I'm saying, if you think I'm wrong that belief is not chosen, think about that feeling. Think about what that means. That means I haven't persuaded you of what I'm saying, and you are experiencing the very thing I'm talking about, which is not being persuaded. Right? If you really think belief is you can just choose it, well then choose to believe I'm right. Just make the choice now.
Yeah.
Just decide to believe that beliefs can't be chosen. And you'll realize it's kind of necessarily true.
Yeah, I think I could affirm like the involuntarist because once you guys explain it, it sounds pretty consistent.
I
With
appreciate
like
that. I mean, respect
some
to you
views I've heard.
for saying that. I appreciate that. And where it gets tricky is if you then fold that back into the theological framework, which then
Yeah, I want to see how
criminalizes.
this connects. So I'm
Yeah,
curious.
so how it connects is, and what my book is about, is having established this, you then have to look at salvation doctrines in a slightly different context. So if we're then saying, okay, well, salvation is conditional on belief, but belief can't be chosen, how does it make moral sense to punish someone for not having it if they just can't have it? They can't decide to have it. It's tricky, right?
Well,
I think we have to talk about why people are punished. Because at least on the, I don't know if this is true of other Christians, but on the Catholic view, nobody is punished for unbelief. In the sense that, like, for any person that goes to hell,
Yeah,
it's
it's the
not only
sins.
going to be for their ignorance, right? Like, no one's punished for their ignorance, especially if it's not something they can control in certain contexts, because there are certain contexts where people, like you said, like, will be introduced with something like the case of Judas, and they still choose to reject it. So,
That's why I said the divine pardon, because a lot of Christians, they'll just say, well, you're not punished for non-belief, you're punished for your sins. But
mhm,
the prerequisite to be quote unquote saved is not something we can actually choose. Like I'm not saying I'm the greatest person in the world, but I genuinely try to be a good person, and I feel empathy for others, you know. Um, but I just cannot, like, just decide to believe and become convinced of it.
okay.
Yeah.
But
Well, let me
go ahead.
give you a countersample that actually comes from St. Thomas Aquinas, and I don't remember which part of the Summa this is from, but he actually talks about something similar like this. So Catholics, we have the view that a person who hasn't been introduced, like say somebody in Saudi Arabia, they don't know anything about Christianity, they don't know who Jesus is, maybe they're Muslim, they think he's like a prophet or something like that.
Yeah,
But in no way can they go learn it. Maybe they don't have access to like a lot of information. So for someone like that, we take the view that this person can still be saved if they follow their conscience, observe the natural law. So that means like
yeah,
pursue
I got you.
virtue, like act in accordance with proper morality, right? This person, before the end of their life, we can be certain, St. Thomas says, that God would send them like a preacher or a pastor, or he'll illumine them in like an inward illumination, or he'll just send an angel for them to be taught the faith, like the Catholic faith, and be given the truths that they need to be saved. So in that moment, they would be able to make what we call a supernatural act of faith, and this person could believe and be saved.
It feels a bit victim blamey, that it's like saying, like, well, you had no choice, I sent you, someone knocked on your door and dropped a leaflet, that's it,
Hmm.
like it presumes that whoever that person was that God sent to deliver the message would have executed on it appropriately. Like, why is God choosing such a silly and flimsy way of communicating, where all he needs to do is just make an appearance and go, I'm here, I exist, I'm real?
Well,
And it would be
the
trivially
our
easy
view
for him
is
to
that
do
he,
that.
yeah, our view is that he did that 2 millennia ago.
Well, yeah,
So
Well,
but why does he stop?
I mean, I can tell you as a matter of fact, and I can not only speak for myself, others, like many others in these groups on both TikTok and YouTube, have experienced the same thing, where we genuinely wanted to continue believing, former Christians ourselves. I wasn't Catholic, I was Seventh Day Adventist. Um, but I just couldn't do it, and I still can't.
well, in your case specifically, as a Catholic, I take the view that you were never a Christian ever.
Yeah,
Not even, yeah. So
I'm,
like
I'm,
in your case, it wouldn't even be the case that
I,
you stopped believing
I'm
because you
not.
never believed
I
to
was
begin with.
convinced Jesus is Lord and
Uh,
Savior, etc. I'm not
Sorry,
really.
guys, we have to hit this one. We have, you were never a real Christian on our believer bingo.
Yeah, I've
That's
heard
pretty
lots
good.
of Christians
Uh-huh.
tell me Catholics aren't real Christians.
yeah.
I'll leave
Uh-huh.
the gate. I'll leave the gatekeeping. You guys can argue about that amongst yourselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But to the point, it's really, this isn't complicated. Belief isn't a choice. I know that for a fact from my own experience. God is, if God can make it so everybody knows he exists, and then they could be Judas if they want, or they could be one of his trusted disciples or what have you.
Uh-huh.
But from that point forward, there's a choice. So basically, what we have right now is moral aspersions passed on, people not being able to be convinced of a thing, and that's just
Hmm.
morally nonsensical.
So
Yeah.
let's say I take the view that some people were created with the knowledge. Well, this is just true, like if I on my view, that some people were created and God knows that he wasn't going to give them the same amount of, let's just say, grace as other people. Why would that be problematic? That's just like
Be-
the Augustinian view.
It would depend what he wants to do with them as a result of that being the case.
Let's let's say he knew they were going to go to hell, and he knew
Yeah.
they were going to resist him, or
Then
they
he's
weren't going to believe.
creating. Then he's creating people in order to send them to hell. And what does that say about his character? It would have been
No,
better for him to just not create them.
no, because he could bring a greater good out of their existence.
So he creates people in order to send them to hell because
I
there's
wouldn't say that.
because that's the entailment of creating people knowing that that he's not going to give them the grace of belief, or that they're not going to come to belief. It means that he's creating them knowing they're going to be sent to hell. It would have been better for him to just not create them. But your response was that there might be some benefit to doing this, that some wonderful outcome that happens later as a result of this. I would ask, is God powerful enough to bring about that benefit without creating these people to send them to hell?
Yeah, so I just want to get clear on this thing I'm saying. I'm just saying some people, he gives everybody the sufficient grace to be saved, but some people get more grace than others. Like some people are given like infallible grace to achieve that salvation.
But it's
Those are
still
called
the
the
case
elect.
that people
But
don't believe. It's still the case that people don't believe,
yeah,
and he could change that easily.
he could.
If he's omniscient, he would know before anyone had even walked on the earth the names and addresses of everyone who was going to be born and fail to be convinced of his existence and then die and therefore be sent to hell. He could just simply have not done that. He could have avoided it and spared all of those people that suffering, but he's choosing the suffering. He's choosing unnecessary suffering. And the reason why I say it's unnecessary is if your theodicy is that the suffering of all of these people is required in order for him to fulfill his plan, that suggests that he's not omnipotent, because it means that only under these conditions can his plan be fulfilled. He can't bring about his plan to fruition without some minimum quota of agony that needs to be imposed on a load of people by him. And I think that brings into question his moral character.
Yeah, I don't think I would make such a strong claim to say it's necessary that these people suffer for him to bring about some good end. I'm just going to say that he chose to do it this way. And if he chose to do it this way, I mean, that's just how it is.
Well, that makes it worse for him, not better. It makes it's capricious. Then it's just arbitrary. He chose because he just felt like
That's not arbitrary. No.
Well, it means he just was on a whim. He just I'm going to stiff this guy and I'm going to burn that one and I'm going to screw over that one. It just he's getting worse all the time.
That's because so for any person that goes to hell, they chose to go to hell. And if,
by that, I just mean that they chose to sin and they're damned for their sins. They're not damned for anything else. They're not damned from their ignorance or because they're born in Saudi Arabia, they're damned for their sins, right? So that's our view.
But also, that doesn't, hang on a second. You can't use the word they chose it. You can't use the word they chose it.
Of course I could.
Why? What did they choose?
They didn't. Okay, so like a guy robs an old lady. He didn't choose to do that?
Yeah,
or
but
do you take
again,
that view too?
But note the inversion that's happening here. Let's say we grant that everyone is morally flawed, and therefore, as a result of being morally flawed, everyone deserves punishment. But here's where the sneaky theological gaslighting happens: is this idea that everyone is morally flawed, but everyone gets access to the kind of vaccine that will cure you of being morally flawed, but the vaccine is only administered to people who are convinced of certain things. But we're going to still pretend that everyone chose because of their actions. Nobody chose to not be convinced, and being convinced is the thing you need to be absolved of your flaws.
Yeah, but I gave the case earlier of the person who's given the faith after they have already observed the moral precepts, not before. So they're given the faith later on in life after they've attained virtue and sought after God.
That's lovely for them, but what about the people who aren't? We can disregard the people who are given the faith. We can disregard them. They're not in the equation. I'm talking about people who are not given the faith. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I'm going to hell apparently, because I haven't lived a perfect life, and because, as well as not living a perfect life, I wasn't convinced of the claims that I need to be convinced of in order to be absolved of not having lived a perfect life. That's just morally idiotic.
Well, no, because we don't even have to talk about you being convinced or not. Your sins are sufficient to damn you. Actually, not receiving baptism is sufficient to damn you. So.
Right, according to Mark 16:16. But if I have the faith, we don't need
to talk about the faith.
But if I have the faith, then I'm not damned anymore, am I?
No, we're talking about the divine pardon. The
divine
pardon being contingent on something that we cannot choose.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're saying like, okay, so the question's about God, like remission of sins, right? And
It's
remission of sins only happens for those who have faith.
who believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's I call it the divine pardon because it always
Okay.
gets down to you go to hell for your sins, not for non-belief. But what we're referring to is the prerequisite to be saved. One of the prerequisites, the most important one, is to be convinced of something that we are incapable of being convinced of with the evidence we're presented. And John and I have both thought about this for years and years. I even literally prayed on it. John's always been an atheist. So what am I supposed to do about it?
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
it's
you see
like you
the
haven't, if you haven't assented to the faith, it's your own fault. I don't know what else to say.
oh,
I think
so it's my fault.
I think we're kind of on you
Yeah.
send yourself to hell, really, aren't we?
Yeah, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Thank you very much indeed for
like,
that.
wait, have you ever like done anything evil, like anything, any sins?
Well, nothing I would call evil, but everyone's done things that they consider wrong.
Have you ever had sex outside of marriage?
Oh, lots and lots of
We're,
times.
we're
Okay,
channeling
so
Ray
if-
Comfort now, aren't we? Talk about
So if you
banana.
go, yeah, so that in and of itself is enough for you to go to hell. So
Yeah, but
Yeah,
this is
doesn't matter
missing
if
the
you have
point.
faith
You're not
or not.
This
addressing
is
the
missing
point,
the point.
the divine pardon.
Yeah.
Yeah, God. Let's say that God has not offered it to you. So what?
Yeah, just so what?
Yeah, like
It
seriously, like so what? Like
it
why
makes
is
him
that
a dick
an issue?
because he's imposing a punishment on people. He could easily provide them with what they need in order to be absolved of the punishment,
Well,
and he's
Sean
choosing
can
not
go
to.
to a Catholic church and talk to a priest if that's what his worry
He
is.
could, he could,
and-
but that assumes that would be persuasive to him.
We could just say that God leaves them in their blindness due to their sins. Like
Yeah, which
that's
makes him a
consistent.
complete dick because he
No.
could give them what they need to know what's
doesn't.
true, and he chooses not to, so that
say
he
he
can
doesn't.
punish them.
Okay, and he brings a greater glory out of their punishment. What's the issue for the Catholic?
Well, that's
burning
lovely.
someone
That's
like,
lovely
what
for him.
billions and billions
omni-property-
of people alive for all eternity brings him glory.
Or like, do you say like this contradicts any of the omni-properties? Like,
yeah,
I'm just not
absolutely.
seeing the issue, right?
It completely burns omnibenevolence to the ground because he's
Okay, let's talk about that.
he's choosing to impose suffering on people unnecessarily.
How is it unnecessary? Wait, what do you mean unnecessarily?
Because he's arbitrarily choosing who to give the grace of belief to and who not to.
Well, how do we know it's arbitrary?
Because he's powerful
Well-
enough to do it to whoever he wants, isn't he? It's like saying he has a plan. He can only make his plan work if A, B, and C happen. Well, then he's not infinitely powerful, and you've sacrificed another arm of the omnis. He's getting weaker and weaker with every conversation.
Well, I haven't made a necessary claim. I just said he chose to do this. I didn't say he only could
Right.
do it this way.
Which is why I say
No
it's
one's making that claim.
Why should I say it's arbitrary then?
No,
He just chose
arbitrariness assumes that he doesn't have reasons or sufficient
you're-
reasons, right?
It doesn't
But we
have
haven't
sufficient
established that.
reasons because you get it easily by saying a sufficient reason would be he needs something to happen in order for something else to happen. That's how we define a reason as, right? You need A to happen in order to, you want B, but in order for B to happen, you need A to happen, and that's why we say A is the reason. Ultimately B, is the reason for A, because we're trying to bring about B with A. That works if you're not omnipotent. If you're omnipotent, you can go directly to B and you don't need A. And deciding on A is arbitrary. It's just deciding on extra suffering, deciding on
What if-
more suffering than is needed.
So let's say God instantiated this world over a different world, but you said like you're saying it's arbitrary because he doesn't have a sufficient reason, which we still haven't established that. But let's just say like this world was a little bit better than the other world he chose not to instantiate. Would that be sufficient? Would that be a reason?
There's no sufficient reason for imposing suffering or punishment on people if he could avoid it and still have the same outcome in the end. My friend, I've put a poll to both rooms to just say, are we happy to carry on or would we like to move on? And both rooms have fairly resoundingly said, thank you for the discussion. We time for another one, but feel free to come back and we'll carry this on. I do appreciate you listening with an open mind to the doxastic involuntarism argument. That immediately puts you ahead of most other people we've spoken to. I think we're not going to have a meeting of minds on the justification for God depriving people of belief and then punishing them for it. But I'm happy to continue the discussion another time. So feel free to come back at some other point.
All right.
We'll pick it up.
I appreciate it. I'm
All right,
gonna
man.
look into some of the stuff you guys talked about. Appreciate it.
Thanks. All the best. Thank you.